Welcome to the Painting of the Week podcast, where we look at some of the most significant paintings throughout history. Introducing your hosts, Phil Grabsky and Laura Bentham.
Can we ask the question now? Can I ask a question?
You start by asking a question.
Oh, okay.
We're going to start this week with a question
From Laura.
Should
we say first of all, who he is, and then my question might become more relevant?
Okay. Well, Alfred Sisley is a French-born to British parents Impressionist painter of the late 19th century.
Okay, great. So the question I was asking, and I don't know if you're going to know the answer to this question, Phil, but do you have any idea why some Impressionists were way more famous than others? Because it was a small group. Yeah. And it seems that there's some that just really way more famous. And when you actually sort of collect the work all together, they're not going to like me for saying this, but there's some of the paintings, there's not a lot in it, is there? They're sort of similar with the obviously they're Impressionists, that's the whole idea.
So I think that's a really interesting question. So,
good.
Of that group, let's say, it's more than a dozen. The most famous is going to be Monet, Manet, even though some people obviously get them confused because their names are so similar.
Yeah.
Cézanne, one of our most popular films, Renoir, Degas. Mm-hmm. So these are the big names.
And you always mention Pissarro.
Well, see, I think Pissarro is to some extent with Sisley and Bert Morisot, Bert as in Berthe, a woman, Mary Cassatt, that we've talked about in another podcast, in that they are not quite as well known. So right now, we're doing a big biographical film about Camille Pissarro, who is known as the father of Impressionism. That he's a bit like Haydn. The other composers like Mozart and Beethoven looked up to him as as Papa Haydn, as Mozart called him.
Well, that's quite cute.
But maybe they're not quite as famous to the general public, and it's always interesting to look why. Now, I guess the first answer would be maybe their art is not quite as good.
Yeah.
Okay, that's quite subjective, and I must say, if I was offered the choice of a Monet or a Sisley, I probably would take a Monet. There is something slightly more powerful about it, but it's also the vagaries of the market. For various reasons, certain artists that have been pushed harder or whose value has gone up, that get talked about more. It can sometimes be that their biographies are just more. I do think that biography affects the way you look at the painting.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think usually in a positive way, but sometimes knowing a person's biography will also affect your interpretation. I'll give an example. Yesterday I went to the late Constable exhibition at the Royal Academy.
I saw that.
And knowing the life story of Constable's wife, Maria, who over a period of a few short years, I always think that's a funny phrase, a year is a year, but over only a few years, she dies of tuberculosis. Now, at that time, you can see some really dark, gloomy paintings. So it's, you find yourself putting two and two together. He's painting, Hadley Hall, I think it is, in what is in Essex, and it's dark, and you think that's just reflecting his mood.
Yeah.
We don't know that for sure. It might just have been a grey day. But in some ways, I find it more interesting. I've always said, for me, the music of Mozart's more powerful because I know his biography.
Right. So, but can I have one more question?
Yeah.
Do you have an Impressionist that you like more than the others?
Actually, well,
Should we come back to it after?
No, well, I don't want to exclude anybody, but as a result of making films, I think before I started the Monet film, there was a slight sense with Monet that I would never call any Impressionist chocolate box, but that, you know, the lily ponds, and it was perhaps a little bit, well, let me put it another way. When I started reading his letters, that whole film was based on his letters.
Yeah.
And really started looking at his paintings, I just thought he is the most incredible painter. Mm. And there's so much narrative in these works, and it's not just a pretty woman and a nice child walking through a field of poppies. It's so much more to him. And actually syncing up his life story with the paintings, I really grew to think he's a master craftsman, a master artist. But that also happened, and actually it always happens at the end of every film. I think this is the greatest artist that ever lived.
This is the one.
Yeah, I mean, it happened with Leonardo not so long ago. But
that's so good, isn't it? That does happen, because when you get, like you say, when you watch a documentary or something, you just get really inspired.
You do,
and that's lovely.
The other one where it really happened, and actually, I used to say that Caravaggio was my favourite artist, but I hesitate now, because when I made the film about Cézanne, and you look at the complexity of what he does,
right? Yeah,
it is staggering when you really look at one of his paintings. The amount of brushstrokes, which are so tiny, but different colour, the palette, and again, his experimentation, the emotion in those paintings.
Yeah, okay. It's too hard. It's like music, isn't it?
But I wouldn't.
Too hard. It is too hard. Yeah,
it is too hard, and it's like I used to get asked this all the time. Who do you prefer, Mozart or Beethoven?
Yeah, depends what mood you're in.
Depends what mood you're in.
Yeah. 100%.
Although, I think if I was taking one work of art with me to my desert island, it would be the works of Mozart.
Okay.
Now, I wouldn't, in thinking about who's my favourite artist, I wouldn't have thought of Sisley. But he is a very, very fine artist.
Yeah, it's great.
And he does have an interesting background. His father was a merchant or dealer in silk, I think, and his mother was a music connoisseur. One of them had a French parent, so there is a connection to France, but he is born in Paris, but of these British expat parents. And I do know a bit, he gets sent back to Britain, but he wants to be a painter, and he comes back to France.
Yep.
And he joins a studio, which I've come across in other films, in 1862. It's a guy called Gleyre, Gleyre. Or probably if I pronounce it properly, I would roll the R's, Gleyre. But this,
leave you to that for sure.
Yeah, something like that. But in that studio, he meets Monet, he meets Renoir, he meets Bazille. And of course, these people are hugely influential.
Oh, yeah.
So they all start painting together, and in particular, of course, you go outside. This is that moment when artists won't go through it again. Everyone listening to these podcasts must know by now.
Yes. Paint
is now in tubes. That allows people to go outside. And Argenteuil, so these little, if you look on the map around Paris now, they've kind of been absorbed by greater metropolitan Paris. But you see these kind of villages and towns like Argenteuil, which were outside of Paris. And you could get on a carriage, but this is also the time of the railroads. Railroads are changing France and Paris very rapidly. That actually is a road bridge that we can see in this painting. By the way, the painting is on the 7th-art.com website. It's called The Bridge at Argenteuil from 1872. So that bridge is a road bridge, but he might have gone to Argenteuil by train, because that's certainly how some of the artists went. So they would basically get their tubes and put their easel on their back and the brushes in their pocket and some tubes of paint.
Away they go.
Fantastic freedom. It's a bit like when we as filmmakers about 20 years ago the camera technology improved very rapidly, so we could just go anywhere with small cameras.
Yeah.
Now, in my case, I went to Afghanistan. I wouldn't have done that if I'd been filming on film with a crew of 5 in a big box of film. So technology always has an impact on creative people. Now, what is interesting about this painting and why, you can imagine, yes, Monet's and others have just painted fields, but as an artist, I think it's just so natural, isn't it, to go and paint a river?
Yeah,
because
for sure.
you've got all these different textures. Mm-hmm. There's so much activity. So you've got land-based activity, water-based activity. You've got a bridge connecting everything and people going across the picture plane. And then you've got the big skies. And we've talked before, haven't we, about, Constable and his big skies.
Yeah. These ones, these cloud formations, they're sort of just more delicate, really, aren't they?
Or are they actually a bit crap?
No, I don't know.
They're not the greatest clouds, are they?
I wouldn't like to say that, but no, I don't know now. Now you said that, Phil. I suppose if we were looking at Constable the other week.
Well, we don't want to pretend that everything we look at is a masterpiece.
No.
I don't think those clouds are great, actually.
Okay. They could be, looks like little puffs of smoke from a train.
In fact,
You're wrong.
Have you ever seen clouds like that?
No, actually, now you say it. Oh, dear. We don't want to upset Sisley fans.
No, but on the other hand, the water is fantastic.
It certainly is.
I mean, I'm always amazed, because I'm not a painter. These guys start with a blank canvas.
I'm definitely not a painter.
But into that canvas, he's created absolutely that sense of that river.
Yeah.
And there's nothing two-dimensional about this. It's completely three-dimensional, this painting.
Yes.
It's brilliantly done.
It is. It is. I mean, I do love that house, actually, and that little sort of... well, it's probably not a shed.
Well,
yeah.
Well, it could be the kind of little shed outside the house where that guy's going with all his fishing implements.
He was known for his landscapes, wasn't he? And most of them actually probably a bit greener than this. Because when you actually look at the riverbank there, it's actually probably not the most colourful of paintings.
Good spot. He's actually known for fairly pale colours.
Is he? Okay.
Yeah. Pale blues, pale greens. And actually, I think that's one of the things that doesn't really draw me to them. Mm-hmm. That visceral pleasure you get from some of the other Impressionists. Yeah. And particularly when you get to somebody like Van Gogh,
Well,
absolute pure colour straight out of the tube. And there's a real delight in colour. This isn't quite like that.
So that's maybe why he wasn't.
It's almost
Sisley. I mean, I'd not heard of him.
It's almost like pastel.
Yeah. I hadn't heard of him at all. Which is why I was saying, isn't it funny how with the Impressionists there were those ones, the big, outstanding ones, and then absolutely never heard of Sisley at all.
He does change. He does become more colourful. I always notice Sisley because you have these fantastically, they just seem very French names.
Yeah.
So even Mary Cassatt feels like a French name.
Yeah.
Renoir and Cézanne and Monet and Manet and Pissarro and then Alfred Sisley. Like, what?
It's actually, but do you know, because you paint this painting, Phil, have you seen it? Or did you just look through his work and think, I quite like that one?
This painting is actually in Memphis. And I've never been to Memphis and I haven't seen it live, no.
Every time we do a podcast, we always I totally would love to go to Memphis.
Our list.
It's getting worse, but I would really like to go there.
The reason I chose it actually was because so many of these artists that we mentioned, this Impressionist group, went to Argenteuil. Argenteuil comes up again and again. Some of these painters are doing hundreds of paintings and they must have been bumping into each other. And somebody like Monet, Monet's life was getting up at dawn.
Yeah.
He'd sometimes go out, he might go somewhere for a month, leave his wife behind who had numerous children and stepchildren to look after, with not much money because they were poor. Monet would go away for a month and he would stay in a boarding house somewhere, get up first thing in the morning. He'd take maybe 2 or 3 easels with him. He'd find a spot by a river, by Rouen Cathedral, in a field of grain stacks by the sea, set up 1, 2, 3, 4 easels.
Okay.
Because oil paints have to dry and he's trying to capture a moment. So he'd be working on multiple paintings. And there's a wonderful story in the Monet film about how he's painting in by the sea. Was it Étretat? Anyway, he's painting by the sea and he gets hit by a wave and all of a sudden he's tumbling and he's really annoyed because when he pulls the painting out, all the paint's,
Yeah, but he could have sold that one, couldn't he?
Oh, he could sell anything.
Exactly. Someone would have come along and been like,
he could sell a napkin.
He's done something new.
Yeah.
This is
truly impressionistic.
Well, one of these wave pictures.
Some of Van Gogh's paintings, well, not only Van Gogh, some of Van Gogh's paintings, you can physically see the sand that's blown into the paint.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because oil paint has to dry. So,
it's just.
So Argenteuil was one of these places that they would go to very quickly get out of the city and paint. And there was probably a nice cafe there.
I was just about to say that. I bet there was a brilliant cafe.
I'm sure that
they've all been sitting there having a lovely time.
Yeah.
But that was the reason they went, really.
Sisley,
get about the bridge.
This is quite an interesting moment for Sisley because 1870, the Franco-Prussian War breaks out, which is bad news for France because they get defeated.
Yeah.
We should bear in mind that France and Germany fought 3 wars between 1870 and 1945. And we think we know 2 of them, but we forget the first one, which was the Franco-Prussian War, which caused a lot of artists to go abroad. But before that happens, Sisley's father, his business goes belly up, basically. And from that moment on, Sisley is basically a very impoverished painter for the rest of his life because his paintings didn't sell as well.
No.
But
he stayed in France, did he? Because he did go back to England for a while, didn't he?
1870 he goes back.
Yeah.
As did other artists.
Because he did a few of the Thames, didn't he?
Thames, Hampton Court.
Hampton Court, yeah.
But again, referencing yesterday when I went to the Lake Constable. So Constable was painted, when these artists like Sisley, Monet, Pissarro, when they came to England because they were forced to.
Yes.
Because they were fleeing the war, fleeing the possibility of being conscripted, whatever it was. They are 1870. They're already thinking about this way of painting, but then plausibly for the first time in their lives, they see the works of Turner and Constable.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And they are absolutely knocked sideways because Turner and Constable are doing stuff. Talk about capturing light.
Yeah.
The fleeting effects of light. I mean, Constable and Turner are so far ahead. Sisley too.
Yes.
And all right, I'm a bit disparaging about these clouds, but I mean, you can't look at a series of Constable's works without realising that sometimes half the canvas is clouds, 2/3 of the canvas.
Yeah.
I mean, clouds were hugely important to Constable as they were to Turner, or skies were to Turner. So...
because when we looked at that painting the other day of Constable...
The Gleaners.
Yes.
Yeah.
There wasn't actually a lot in it, what we said, whereas Sisley has got loads in it.
In fact,
he's really gone for it here.
In fact, yesterday in this exhibition, there must have been, I'm guessing, 50 or 60 paintings.
Yeah.
Only a handful were less less Spartan than the one we looked at.
Oh, really?
Usually there's so much detail.
Yeah, okay.
It's quite interesting, that one in Brighton, the Gleaners.
Well, once again, then it's because his wife wasn't well. Maybe he had to get back to her.
Yeah,
look after her and things.
He's probably taken him an hour to walk up the hill.
Yeah, it's quite a way.
He's probably got a couple of hours to do his painting.
Yeah.
Or at least get enough of a sketch down that he can finish it back in the house.
And he really loved her, so he just
Road.
wanted to get back, maybe. So, yeah. Whereas Sisley looks like he didn't want to get back. He was too busy in the cafe on this one. He's got everything in this. He's got the little boat to the left, two boats to the left.
There's a lot going on, really.
There is. Is that a fisherman coming up there?
So from left, if we go left.
Yes.
So okay, let's have a look at this. So you close your eyes.
I'm going to get busy now.
Close your eyes. You open your eyes.
Yeah.
And I find I am drawn to the river.
I'm totally drawn to the river.
So we go to the river. We go to that brightest spot of the whole painting, which is the sail.
Mm.
So we go. My eye goes along the little jetty to the moored up rowing boat. Then we go. There's a couple of spots of white, pinky white in the water. It takes me, not that I need much taking, to the sail.
Yeah.
Now the sail is pointing up at that first cloud. Don't know how deliberate this is, but those first clouds kind of go left to right.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly they feel odd if they went right to left, so they go up. And they kind of then skirt around that kind of whitey cloud. But then it gets a bit fractured. Maybe that's why I'm a bit uncomfortable with the clouds, because then my eye's a bit unhappy halfway across. So then I drop down. This all sounds very formulaic, doesn't it? But this is just what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
My eye then drops down to the bridge. So the bridge is at that point in the distance, but visibly legible enough. You look carefully. There's obviously looks like there's some buildings on the left side. In fact, that is Argenteuil, I know, on the left, and there's another town here on the right. So the bridge is connecting Argenteuil and another place.
Yeah.
So over there's Argenteuil, and then you cross the bridge, and I'm looking at it really closely now. I don't know whether you can see anything on it.
No, but he has hinted at it. Well,
Maybe.
It feels like it.
It feels like something's going on. Then, actually, I'd not noticed this before. You have a boat that's moored, which is painted white.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of white. So, otherwise, I guess if it wasn't painted white, it wouldn't stand out at all. Very strong, very stark mast. You've got the hills, with a little bit of sun catching the hill on the left as we're looking.
And is that other boats behind the white one? The tiny little white one?
There are some more boats down there. And a little building by the bridge, which is very finely done, actually. Easy to miss, kind of grey square building. Okay, then you got the guy, as we mentioned him before, definitely a fisherman.
Yes.
Seems to be heading back to that little hut, which is maybe where he keeps his fishing rods and his rowing boat.
Yeah.
Which is surrounded by that picket fence, a little tree. And again, the trees kind of the clouds kind of echo the movement of him up the hill, and the buildings themselves. There's almost like two pictures in some ways, isn't it? You've got the picture on the left, picture on the right.
I mean, it's a lovely painting. I mean,
It's kind of diagonals rather than circles, isn't it?
There's nothing not to like, really. It's a sweet painting. It's
a sweet painting of an artist experimenting, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, this is 2 years before the Impressionist exhibition in 1874.
Right.
So these guys are trying out this new way of painting, and it was radical. It was revolutionary.
So this was one of his beginning ones, was it, Sisley? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, he's
I suppose maybe if you were in that...
He's 32, 33. He would have felt like, bearing in mind that people died younger.
Yeah.
He would have felt time on his shoulder, really.
But also, if you were in that group, wouldn't you want to play it a bit safe? You don't want to go completely crazy and then be too critical of your work if you were within that group.
Well, it is interesting. I mean, this is radical, this is revolutionary, but there were still limits.
Yeah.
Now, the dealer, Paul de Noël, for example, who was quite a conservative Catholic guy, but he bought up as many of Degas and Manets and Monets as he possibly could.
Oh, right.
But for him, for example, Van Gogh was like one step too far. He was too out there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So,
okay.
And of course, beyond Van Gogh,
that
we call a post-impressionist, you start getting into abstraction, blocks of colour, and in fact, even when there's no narrative, you're not. again, we've talked about abstract artists in previous podcasts. Howard Hodgkin, for example.
Yeah. Oh, I love Howard Hodgkin.
Although not the painting we did, but I mean, there are other paintings which are just blocks of colour. Bridget Riley, whatever.
Yeah.
So,
shame our ancestors weren't involved in buying art.
Oh,
can you imagine, Phil?
just one of these.
Would have been so good, especially if they bought some of the Van Gogh, one right out there.
Did you see that Frida Kahlo that was sold last week? The most expensive Frida Kahlo ever sold in Europe, $34 million.
Do you know which one it was?
The picture of the painting of it is her, and on her forehead she's done a drawing. Actually, not really. I don't actually think it's that wonderful, if I'm honest.
No.
But there's a painting of Diego Rivera on her forehead,
okay.
which is really obviously all I think about is Diego Rivera.
Yeah, okay.
It's a bit blunt.
34 million.
34 million. I know.
Okay.
I mean, Sisley would go. I mean, I'm guessing that Sisley would not be an inexpensive artist to buy.
Oh no, not at all.
And as you've mentioned, his great love was landscapes. And in fact, somewhere I've read that he painted, which is extraordinary actually, he painted more landscapes than any other Impressionist artist.
Yeah.
And when you think about how many landscapes a Cézanne did or a Monet did, that's going something. I can only assume that somebody has added it all up, because I'm not going to. But
Come on, Phil.
But that does tell me that Sisley was prolific. I have to say, there's something... I also think there's something a little bit safe about doing landscapes. So I know as a filmmaker that it's a really nice day out when I have to go into the countryside and film landscapes.
Yeah.
And it's challenging, and you try and, you walk, you've got a lot of predecessors have done similar things. You're trying to paint, you're trying to film best way you possibly can and better than others have done it. But it's certainly easier than going down to the heart of a city to film, crowds and people, and, it's less. So this was also quite pleasant thing to do, isn't it?
And also you can take your time. It's not you're dealing with a subject that's just sitting there. They've then got to jiggle about a bit. Yeah. And have a break.
It isn't, got to be said. There wasn't a huge tradition of landscape painting in the history of art to this point.
Right.
It was often about
the
telling...
Impressionists changed that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, them and the school before them. But pretty much, in a Leonardo, you might have a portrait of a woman, and in the background there'd be a little bit of landscape. But landscape's for landscape's sake.
Yeah.
There's a similar story with classical music, that music used to accompany the voice. And it's really in the 18th century where you start to get symphonies, which is just music without voice. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was considered to be a new way of communicating with God directly. And there's definitely something about the landscape which is about respecting the extraordinary world in which we live. Yeah. And reflecting that without necessarily having to mediate through the portrait of a duke or a noble or a rich woman, or it is more. And of course, one of the great things about Impressionist art is when, and in some ways maybe it's plausibly what be one's favourite, but when they start painting those examples of the modern world, so railway stations, and boulevard, and.
But with the landscape, were they? Maybe it wasn't commissioned either, so it's just done more for. Was it done more for pleasure?
That's another big change. These guys are painting. Sometimes they have an eye on the market. Yeah. People incorrectly assume Van Gogh never cared about the market. Not true. Mm-hmm. So there's a period when he thought his brother had told him. His brother was an art dealer. He said, what people want is they want flowers in vases. Okay. Because they want to put it on their walls. So Vincent did want to sell paintings. He did want to earn money, so he starts doing flowers in vases. Yeah. Yeah.
He did quite well for it. He did a good job.
They were wonderful paintings, but he didn't sell them.
No.
Now,
his brother was useless.
I don't know that there was much. there was no market at this point in Europe for Impressionist work, full stop.
Right.
And certainly not landscapes.
No.
That comes later. So these guys are not doing this because they think there's a market. They're doing it either to advance their careers because they hope they can get it into the salon.
Yes.
Which in fact Sisley does achieve, to have a piece accepted by the salon, the annual salon. But mainly they're doing it because they want to experiment.
Okay.
And,
okay.
There's also another factor here, which is if you're outdoors, you've got only you've got daylight.
Yeah.
So there's another advantage of Impressionist works is that you can get it done in a day. You might take your cameras back to the studio and finish it there.
Yeah. Yeah, but he's got to get on with that.
Leonardo could take years because you don't see the brushstrokes.
No.
You look at a Leonardo painting or a Titian and you think, how on earth have you done that? Cézanne, for example. I mean, there's one famous portrait where I think he got to 134 sittings. The poor guy.
Oh, no.
Sat for it.
Could you imagine? Especially if he didn't like it at the end.
Well,
he was just so disappointed.
There's one where Cézanne said to the sitter, "I'm going to throw this away. It's not working." The guy said, "There is absolutely no way on this planet. I've sat here so long," and he took it. He kept it.
I bet he did. Well, he did well. Also, can you imagine?
I know.
Or the great grandchildren or whatever are sitting there with this painting.
I did interview a wonderful guy who was Picasso's grandson.
Really?
I went to his beautiful apartment in Paris.
Oh, I love it.
And, like I might have a photograph of my kids on the wall, he had Picasso's.
No.
I mean, and he only needed 2 or 3, didn't he?
That was so good.
He doesn't have the same worries about pensions that you and I might have.
Did he just have Did he have them with little lights on them and things? Did he have them, or did he just have them on the wall and that was it? It'd be really interesting, wouldn't it?
There wasn't any specific lighting.
Really?
No, it was in this. And this was just. This is just his living room.
Yeah.
The only room I went into.
Probably got a couple more in the bathroom, just stuck up on the wall.
I know.
That's so good. I love it. Oh yeah, they're my grandfathers. Yeah.
So I don't know whether I don't actually know about Sisley's descendants.
No.
Be interesting to find out.
Yeah,
but
where they are.
Again, going right back to your first question, it always is the way that sometimes it's not necessarily a question of how good somebody is. Sometimes it's just luck or the biography or who they knew or, if you talk to art dealers, they'll say that, paintings with a lot of blue in them sell better than paintings with a lot of red in them. I mean, it's like bigger. Some paintings are priced on size. I mean, it's like, there's so much more to it. The Mona Lisa is not Leonardo's best painting by any stretch of the imagination, but it's the most famous because it was stolen twice.
That's so funny,
so
isn't it?
all these things roll into it. Sisley, for whatever reason, has kind of just gone under the radar a little bit, but well worth a look.
Yes, we need to look at some more.
We do.
Let's go and look at some more, Phil.
I think what we need to do is go to Argenteuil.
Yes.
And get a real sense of the location.
Find the cafe.
Just the question is, do we do that before or after all the other places that we have to go to?
Thank you for listening to the Painting of the Week podcast. For more information, please visit our website at seventh-art.com or contact us by emailing info@seventh-art.com. See you next time.